Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for letting me in. I feel honored to be backstage. Can I introduce Aviva and plug our Yom Iyun one more time?
100%. Do you want me to let them in now or wait 1 minute?
That's up to Aviva.
Give me 30 seconds.
Perfect.
All right.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. We're gonna just wait 1 more minute, and then we'll get started. I am yellow, but I have to introduce this. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So excited to be with you again, and thank you for those who tuned in to these classes in the past. I'm excited to introduce my colleague, Rabbi Aviva Richman, who's going to take us through this morning's learning. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that on Sunday we have a mini Yom Iyun online. It's a morning of study, and we're inviting you all to join us. And so I'm going to just send you the link to the Yom Iyun in the chat box so you can sign up. I'll be teaching as well as some of my colleagues, and we'll be really excited to learn with you. I'm going to say one other thing, which is if you like what we're doing, and we're trying to do as much as we can in this age, feel free to support our work with your generous tzedakah dollars. I'm going to put in our donate page as well. I'm turning it over to Rav Aviva.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you all. I'm excited to jump in on a little bit of Haggadah prep. I have to say, and as much as there's so many difficult circumstances this year, in some ways, I feel like we're all going to be even more prepared for Pesach as we have all these bite-sized ways to jump in and do a bit of learning in our days. So what I wanted to do with you all this morning is look at a part of the Seder that I think sometimes gets a little bit less attention than it could. Just at the very end of Magid, after all the interesting and rich nuggets of storytelling that we have about the Exodus and hopefully a lot of rich discussion, we finally get to drink that second cup of wine. And I want to look at the significance of, most of that cup of wine we're holding and sort of gazing at, perhaps longingly, throughout the extended Magid discussion. But at the very end of Magid, we say the beginning of Hallel, just 2 short psalms. And then the blessing on this cup is actually a blessing of redemption. And I want to look at what it means to have that little taste of Hallel on that second cup of wine. That's a sort of prelude to the fuller recitation of Hallel that comes at the end of the Seder. And the significance of saying Hallel at night. Pesach is the only holiday where we recite Hallel and sing all these songs of praise at night. Usually we say Hallel during the day, which we also do on Pesach. Interestingly, in the modern period, Yom HaAtzmaut is another day when many recite Hallel at night. What's the significance of saying Hallel at night? And in short, what we're going to be looking at this morning is this idea of saying Hallel at night as really a reenactment of that first Hallel that was ever recited. The Midrash imagines that when Bnei Israel were sitting in their homes in Egypt before leaving, before the actual redemption had materialized. That was actually the first moment of song and communal Hallel right there in the dark in Egypt. So that's in short what we're going to be looking at, and I think it sort of speaks very much to what it means to recite Hallel in an unredeemed world, what it means to have a taste of redemption when the environment that we're in seems much less than fully redeemed. Okay, so I think you've all found the source sheet in the group chat. I'm gonna let you open that on your own rather than doing a full screen share here. So feel free to follow along in the sources or to just listen if you prefer. Okay, so the first source we're gonna look at is a midrash. It's source number 1 here. It's an early midrash that is actually a midrash on the Song of the Sea, as you hear, that is recited in the daily liturgy. This midrash, I didn't bring you the whole thing, but this midrash essentially tells the entire story of the Jewish people, past and future, in 10 songs. So it's on the phrase, Et hashira hazot. Oh, I see there's interest to share the screen. Okay, let me see if I can do that. 1 second. This is on the verse. Az yashir b'nei Yisrael et hashira hazot. Then Israel sang this song. The question is, what do you mean this song? As though there was only one song that was ever sung by Israel. Actually, there were many songs sung over the course of the history of the Jewish people. And the very first song that was ever sung was actually not the song at the sea, which you might have expected, right? You might have expected, if you were to ask, when is the first time that Israel erupted in song together, that would be the song at the sea. But actually, this midrash says there was a song before that. So, v'chi shira achati v'halo eser shirotein. Was there only one song? Were there not 10 songs? What are the 10 songs? The midrash tells all 10 songs, pulling different verses from the Bible. But the first one, the first song that Israel ever sang, was actually the song recited in Egypt. Harishona shene'emra b'mitzrayim. Shene'emar hashir yiyeh lachem kilel hitkadesh chag. So quoting this verse from Isaiah, this song will be for you like the song at the eve of the holiday. What is the eve of the holiday? What is the holiday that really occurred in the nighttime? That is the evening of the first Passover in Egypt. Okay, so this is taking this verse from Isaiah that isn't really necessarily about Egypt at all in the plain meaning of the text, and saying, when was there a holiday that occurred at night over song? It must have been that moment in Egypt when you had people gathered in small groups in their homes, actually waiting for redemption, not yet redeemed. And even though the verses in Exodus say nothing about singing, it's just about eating that initial Korban Pesach, or the Passover offering, and eating matzah. This midrash imagines that there must have been a song at that time as well. Okay, so this is our first source here that paints this picture of erupting in song, not at the sort of fullness of redemption at the moment of crossing the sea, but actually at the anticipation of redemption, still waiting in Egypt for this promise of redemption to come true before any full evidence has occurred that they will actually be able to leave. And certainly the experience of leaving has not happened yet. Okay, so I think this is an extremely rich midrash just on its own for kind of bringing us into what that experience of the first Seder was like. Okay. Now, the question is, right, what are we doing at our Seder? And what experience is the Seder meant to draw us into? And we know throughout the Seder, throughout the sort of rich text of Magid, there are questions. Are we supposed to be feeling free? Are we supposed to be feeling like slaves? And we kind of go back and forth. And I think often in the way we think about the flow of the Seder, but by the time you get to the meal, and at the end, all of the songs and Hallel, right, by the end of the Seder, we achieve the experience of freedom, joy, redemption. But what is very interesting is that if you kind of zone in on this second cup of wine and the little bit of Hallel that you recite over it and that blessing of redemption, what I want to put forth here is that that's actually its own moment in the Seder, which is an experience that's a taste of redemption, sort of a partial taste of redemption, while still inhabiting that posture of still sitting in Egypt, waiting to be redeemed. Okay, so this is our picture of Hallel at night, Hallel while you're actually still sitting right there in the same house you've been sitting in throughout your years and years of slavery, still waiting for redemption. So there's a debate that we see among Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel in the Tosefta here. So from the same time period as the Mishnah, our early source, the Tosefta, it talks about a debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. How much of Hallel should you recite on that second cup of wine? Which I think can feel like a very technical question, but there's really a lot at stake in this question, right? How much of Hallel are we singing on the second cup of wine? What exactly is the experience of this partial redemption that the second cup of wine is meant to be about? Okay, so here we have it. How much of Hallel do you say on the second cup of wine? Beit Shammai says until just before Em Habanim Smecha. So up until that point, that's actually the end of the first psalm of Hallel. Ad Em Habanim Smecha. It shouldn't be just before. It should be until Em Habanim Smecha, because it would include that verse. Sorry about that translation. Beit Hillel says, until Chalamish Lamaino Mayim. So until what is the last line of the second paragraph of Hallel, Chalamish Lamaino Mayim, at the end of B'tzei Yisrael. So we're going to scroll down a little bit on this source sheet. I brought to you these opening psalms in the Hebrew and in the English, where you can see Beit Shammai is referring to the very end of that first paragraph, Im Habanim Semecha, Hallelujah. The woman who is barren becomes the joyful mother of children. And Beit Hillel says, Chalamish Lamaino Mayim, until the end of that second paragraph, the flint into a fountain of waters. Okay, great. So a nice sort of technical debate here, but as you can see, the real question is, do you recite or do you not recite that second of the Psalms of Hallel that begins, B'tzeit Yisrael Mimitzrayim, when Israel left Egypt. So Beit Shammai thinks you have to stop before you get to that psalm. Beit Hillel thinks you actually do recite that psalm as well. Okay, and what you need to sort of, I think, understand for this debate to be meaningful is that we're trying to get back into that moment of sitting in our house in Egypt, waiting for redemption. And the question is, do you or do you not recite the psalm that actually is celebrating the Exodus itself, which, if we're doing this reenactment correctly, hasn't actually happened at this point in time. Okay, so we're going to go back up to this passage in the Tosefta. So we have our debate, and then we see, and you close with the blessing for redemption. Beit Shammai says to Beit Hillel, had they left yet so that we should mention the exodus from Egypt? Right? Beit Shammai says, hold on a second. If what we're doing in our Seder is getting back to that moment of sitting in our homes in Egypt, waiting to leave, we're trying to reenact that experience. Why would we sing a psalm, B'tzeiti Se'al Mitzrayim? How could we sing that psalm about leaving Egypt? That hasn't happened. Excuse me. Okay, so if this is supposed to be real, right, it seems like that would essentially be anachronistic to sing that song, B'tzeiti Se'al Mitzrayim. Amar lahem Beit Hillel, afilu hu mamtin ad krot hagever, harei ilu lo yatzu ad shesh sha'ot bayom. Right? Beit Hillel says, well, what are you going to do? It wouldn't even be enough to wait until the rooster crows to sing that song. They didn't really leave until the 6th hour. So it's a little bit confusing here to figure out what the full timeline is of imagining the exact sort of timeline about when they left. But the response here is, hey, ach omer tagula v'adayin lo nigalu. And how can you say the blessing for redemption if they hadn't yet been redeemed, is Beit Hillel's retort to Beit Shammai, right? Which seems to be, well, honestly, the full redemption doesn't happen until much later in the story, right? Even when they pick up and leave, that's not really the full redemption either, says Beit Hillel to Beit Shammai. So if you think that you can only recite the blessing for redemption, if you kind of wait until the period of time where they actually achieved a full redemption, right, whenever that might be, crossing the sea, or who knows, even beyond, the question here is, right, it sounds like what we're doing in this moment of sitting at the Seder and reciting these parts of Hallel is reciting a blessing for redemption, even though redemption has not fully occurred yet. So I think that the extent of kind of what's at stake in this debate around how much you say of Hallel is, right, what are we doing in this moment of jumping back to being in our own homes in Egypt, not having left yet, right? Are we just allowed to say that first part of Hallel that is sort of, right, general and generally imagining a shift from being slaves to being free? Or can we actually recite the piece of Hallel that is about walking out of Egypt, right? And in that way, the question here is, can you say a Hallel, right? It sounds like Beit Hillel is suggesting, even if we're going back to that moment where we haven't left, you actually can still recite the words that are about leaving, because that recitation of Hallel is a Hallel of anticipation and even a Hallel of vision, right? The redemption song there isn't only a song about gratitude for what has occurred. It is actually a song about anticipation and vision of what will occur, and that in and of itself merits the ability to do a full recitation. Okay, I'm just going to glance at some of the chats that have come up here for a second. Okay, yes, so we have some questions too that maybe thought the second cup of wine is over food, the fourth cup is over Hallel. So yes, mostly it's the fourth cup that is dedicated to Hallel, but what I'm wanting to kind of uplift here is that there is this little bit of Hallel that is recited on that second cup of wine. Okay, and yes, right, part of the question here is when we're saying this blessing for redemption, is it perhaps, right, possible to say a blessing that both acknowledges whatever has occurred already for redemption is worth saying a blessing over, even as we are still also saying a blessing about the promise of what will come. Okay, right, so a piece of this might be, as I'm responding to a comment here from David Lohenfeld, that there's actually multiple stages of redemption. And this redemption blessing over the second cup of wine is only an initial part of redemption, right? And it might be the part, to use his words here, right? It might be the part that is more mental rather than fully actualized rebellion, meaning all that's happened so far at this point in the Seder is that Bnei Israel sitting in their homes in Egypt are ready, right? All that's happened is that they've internalized a mindset of being ready to leave, even though B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim, actually leaving, has not happened yet, right? So maybe that that act of redemption that starts in this preparedness phase, just a paradigm shift of what you imagine can happen, is in and of itself worthy of blessing. Okay. Right, I think there's a lot here to delve more deeply into, but what I want to do now is look at part two, right? So part one is essentially describing, and what I love so much about that first midrash, describing that our first communal song happens not at the sea, but before we're redeemed, right? Suggests that there is a place for singing, for reciting Hallel, and being in this sort of joyous redemptive mode, even while we are sitting in the midst of darkness. And even as they are sitting in the totally unredeemed Egypt. But I want to look now at some other sources that we have that suggest that actually being in the midst of an unredeemed state or context is actually not an appropriate context to be singing at all. And then see what happens when we try to put these two pieces together. Okay, so the next piece here, it comes from, again, actually drawing on the scene at the sea, a midrash about the moment of crossing the sea, right? Whether that was an appropriate time to be reciting song. And the sources we're going to look at here are actually about angelic song, right? The angels sort of serenading God in their daily recitation of Kedusha that we mimic when we recite Kedusha, God willing, soon in our days. So the verse here in the Torah that the Midrash is based on is that moment where Israel has left Egypt. They're standing on the brink of the sea, and we have the camp of the Egyptians has approached. And on this, right, the Torah says that the angel of God comes between the camp of Israel and the camp of the Egyptians. Vayasa amud ha'anan mipneihem vayamod me'achreihem. The pillar of cloud comes from in front of the Israelites' camp, goes behind them, so that the cloud is right there between Israel and the Egyptians. Okay, it's very dramatic here. Vayihi ha'anan v'ha'choshech vaya'er et halayla v'lo karav ze al ze kol halayla. So there was this kind of glowing dark cloud that lights up the night. It's a little bit confusing, right? The cloud lights up the night. And they did not approach each other, right? This one did not approach that one all night. So based on the plain meaning of the text, it seems the point is that Israel and Egypt, right, those two camps did not approach each other all night because they had that cloud as a divider between them. But what we see in the Midrash is that this phrase, velo karav ze el ze, is read in light of Isaiah, with the next source here. The kara ze el ze ve'amar, right? The description of the angelic song that's recited daily before God, kadosh, 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 is introduced with the kara ze el ze. This one calls to another, right? One calls to another. The angels call to each other to praise God in song each day. So v'kara ze el ze is pretty similar to v'karav ze el ze, right? Just differs by one letter, an aleph versus a bet. And so this midrash is going to understand v'lo karav ze el ze neither one approached each other, as velo kara ze el ze, they didn't call to each other, meaning it's an indication that the angels did not recite their song on that night, on the verge of crossing the sea. Okay, so we're going to look at these. There's two traditions here about the significance of the angels not singing on this night. This first passage in Megillah here says that the angels wanted to recite their song in the turmoil of the moments of the sea. And God responds and says, how can you rejoice when the wicked are dying? And God essentially silences them, right? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ma'aseh yadai tov'in bayam v'atem omrim shira, right? My creations are drowning in the sea. How can you recite song? And there's a damper placed on the possibility of singing. Now, what's really interesting about this moment is that, right, textually, this midrash is talking about a moment that is in the biblical text, the moment of song for Israel, right? So Israel erupts in song, and yet the angels, when they try to sing, God silences them, right? And we know that we have allusions to this in the Seder when we dip our finger into our cup of wine and take a couple of drops out, in terms of kind of marking the significance of all the Egyptians dying at that point. But it's kind of a complicated text, because in this midrash, it's the angels who aren't supposed to sing, but actually Israel is supposed to sing, it seems. God doesn't shut down Israel for singing the song at the sea, even though the Egyptians are drowning. God shuts down the angels for singing the song at the sea. So that's one piece here that gets to this question of, can you sing even in a time where there's also destruction around you? And the other version of this midrash isn't about the Egyptians dying, but rather, right, to bring us back to that Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai debate perhaps, here we have a different version of this midrash that takes us to that moment that the text describes before crossing the sea. The angels want to erupt in their daily song. And God says, no, how can you sing Ligionotai netunin b'tzara? My legions, right, my people are still actually in trouble. The full redemption hasn't occurred. But atem omrim lefanai shira, and you're going to still sing before me, God says to the angels, hadahu dichtiv velo karav ze al ze kol halayla. God silences them, they actually did not sing, right? And what's interesting about this is it suggests that in a moment of kind of, there's been some level of redemption, but actually not full redemption, right? This midrash is at the moment before crossing the sea. You can't erupt in song when redemption is not complete, when Bnei Israel are still sitting there in trouble. So I think this is just meant to encapsulate the tension of, right, on the one hand, we see Beit Hillel suggesting, well, even when they're still sitting in their houses in Egypt and haven't left yet, it's time to be singing. It's actually, it is the right time to sing about redemption, envisioning that, even though at that moment, right, remember, the Egyptians, the firstborns, are all dying around them. And yet, that's a moment to capture a little bit of Hallel. And here also at the crossing of the sea, right, we see that it's a moment of tension. And these midrashim point towards, actually, maybe it's inappropriate to be singing, certainly from an angelic perspective, if there's not full redemption. And yet, right, it seems like what this second cup of wine represents is actually there is an imperative to sing and to be in this mindset of envisioning, anticipating redemption, even if it is not complete, and even if the world that we are still living in does not seem to reflect that redemptive state at all. So I want to bring this to us this year in particular, as I think it's a difficult set of texts to be grappling with, and I think that second cup of wine is, if you sort of delve into these layers of meaning around that second cup of wine, could be a really important moment in our Seder this year. to reflect on what it means to actually have an imperative, right? To actually say a bracha about redemption, and we follow Beit Hillel. We say that second piece, B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim, that is about leaving Egypt when we haven't left yet. And right, we sort of latch on to this ability to express some level of song, redemption being on the mind, right? Even if it is only, I would say, even if it seems particularly profoundly in contrast with the environment or context that we are currently in. So I invite everybody to, when you get to this point of the Seder, not just be in the mindset of like, phew, we finished Magid and we're really close to having our meal, but to actually delve into what it means to start that little bit of Hallel in the midst of the dark or chaos or unredeemed state that we might be finding ourselves in right now. Thank you all for jumping in to this brief little nugget of Haggadah. I apologize for any background chaos that emerged through the walls here, and wish you all a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you so much to Rav Aviva. And we'll see you back on Monday and Tuesday. I'll be teaching again. And also want to invite you to come to our Yom Yun, Shai Held, Avi Strausberg, Tali Adler, and myself will be teaching Sunday morning. I put it in the chat. I'll put it in again. Thank you so much and have a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.